All right. Well, Ola, welcome to the Noblest Pursuit podcast. For those of you that don't know Ola Mork is my former boss at Love Every and my current business partner at Noble Squad. And we were just talking about Ola had brought up we were talking about Penny Arcade. We were talking about a particular Penny Arcade frame comic, and he was pulling it up, and then I was saying that those guys are the coolest, and he was like, "Oh, by the way, is it Jerry? Yeah, Jerry's lives like a block away from Ola." And I was like, "Holy crap, that's amazing!" And he was talking about how cool and genuine it seems that Jerry is.
Yeah, these are not people. Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here. It's cool to meet your heroes and for them to still be heroes. Penny Arcade and PAX is not even the coolest thing those guys do. Every time I talk about them, and they're the people that need a plug less than anyone in the world. They have plugged themselves. They're set. But
100%.
The Child's Play charity is the thing that will have the longest lasting impact. And it's important that nobody forget that when they started that, people that played video games were weird and gross and kind of not cool. And video games were also kind of not cool.
Gives me chills hearing you talk about it, because I remember the first Child's Play. I was one of those nerds. Like, I remember that. Like, literally gives me goosebumps thinking about it. It's like, that was so cool.
And when they backed up a U-Haul of the Seattle Children's Hospital and said, "I think the contents of this truck will make the children who are here feel better." Everybody was like, "Hold up, where'd that come from?" So he's a cool guy. His kids are cool.
Yeah.
I run into him all the time. He's great. And he's great in all contexts. But the most important thing that they're going to do, or that they have done, will still be challenged.
Yeah. And that's
from my perspective.
It's funny because, like, I followed Penny Arcade from like I said, the first year. I think that was 2001. It might have been 2002, but it was early. And I've seen the evolution of PAX. Like, I remember when that first started. I've actually never been to a PAX. I've got a bunch of Penny Arcade books and prints and things like that. That was a big thing between me and one of the guys in my wedding. His name's Travis, and he's the one that introduced me to Penny Arcade. And I had this, like, it's not like imposter syndrome, but you know how, like, when you were part of a scene and then you kind of grow or change, and like life kind of like just moves, it shifts. And every once in a while I'll come back to PAX, and I haven't been back to PAX, or not back to PAX, back to Penny Arcade. I haven't been back to Penny Arcade like all year this year. For whatever reason, I just hadn't pulled it up. And I always, what does it for me? It's when I need to check the internet. When I check the internet, I pull Penny Arcade. And I think the reason I did it initially was because, like, Google and whatnot, if it's cached, it's always going to load fast and it doesn't matter, right? But Penny Arcade always has a new Monday, Wednesday, Friday, right? Monday, Wednesday, Friday, there's a new comic. You can guarantee that they're pushing out bits. And that just became my default, is I go to Penny Arcade /comic or whatever, and I see if it loads. So I did that recently because I was setting up new Wi-Fi. Yeah, but they are, like you said, I think Child's Play is one of the greatest things.
Yeah, speaking of ancient history, they were the first site that I realized they had a dynamic site, but they were just generating the static version for you. That when you go to pennyarcade.com, you get a static page. They have a real website. That's the snapshot that you get today. And I don't know what, again, it was 2001 or 1999 or whatever when I figured that out, and I was like, oh, that is a better way to do it. Nobody cares if your site is 27 seconds stale.
Those were great times. Like the late 90s, early 2000s, I think were like kind of like the best times on the internet. There was a lot of weird shit going on, but like I remember like the webcomic scene was just, there was so much going on for the webcomic scene that was super cool.
Yeah, it was definitely a time when people hadn't figured out how to monetize content, but wanted to make content, which was cool. I don't want to go back to browser version
No, as a
compatibility
developer,
tests.
that was terrible.
That made me sad.
Yeah.
I think Perl has filled the niche that it needs to fill now. I don't want to go back to every conversation having to start with, we use Perl for this.
Yeah. It's weird.
That was rough.
It's so weird to think about, like, you know, I've been doing code for money since 2001. When was your first dollar?
2000?
Yeah.
Maybe
So
the same summer, 2001. You will not believe the project.
Well, I was just going to say, like, I started
writing
writing code in 99 at West Point. And then I had to leave because, you know, I got diagnosed bipolar, and then almost immediately, I started writing code for money. Like, I just was like, and my first dollar was to write. I wrote a Damon style application for a law firm that sat in the tray, you know, like in the system tray, and all it did was print numbers on pieces of paper to be able to track where the paper went throughout the office. Like, that's all it did. And I got paid a couple $1,000s to do it. It was great. Yeah.
That's amazing. My first like real job with regular hours where I got a W-2 was at a Apple value-added reseller. And before Apple stores, they had a franchise program where they would train techs to work on Apple stuff, and you could have a physical retail presence. Think, you know, in the era of Mac Warehouse magazine, that you would get a magazine
this
that
is when
had
the
like
iMac
a
was
catalog of a bunch of
the
Apple
color
crap.
bubble, right?
So I got the job on the day that the iMac came out, because I went in there and I was like, I know everything about this. And a bunch of old guys who had had Apple stuff for years were like they did not have the elasticity in their brain to memorize every single stupid specification. So when they showed up to see the candy shell, I was like, I know this. I think I sold 15 computers that day. And the owner of the shop was like, hey, can you come back tomorrow and do that again? Yeah, absolutely. And I can't remember the database. I think it was part of Claris was the suite, but it was like the Apple version of Access. And we had built a ticket tracking system. And I guess technically I did get paid to work on our like workflow process through there. That was all written in AppleScript, which was wild at the time. No, my first real programming job was for one summer. I worked for a guy who had been like an adjunct professor for a class I was taking. And the software was written in object-oriented Pascal, and it was for a survey-taking platform. And the idea was that if you wanted to do like a study, how would you craft the questions so that anybody could answer those questions and you would get valid data out of it? And it was one giant Pascal file compiled into Delphi, made a DLL, and you ran it in.
All of that sounds terrible, and
ISS?
I am familiar with most of it. I know you and I have had that conversation about DLLs, and I was like, God, I remember having to work with those, and I hated them. And you're like, but they make it so that you don't have to know anything about the API. And I'm like, yeah, that's the problem. I don't know anything about your API.
On the one hand, it's like, it was super cool. It was a real job. I learned real stuff. I was really pumped to do it. And it was the first time I met a libertarian in the wild who said, I'm going to pay you more so that you can go deal with your taxes. And I was like, cool, I get paid more. And then I went to deal with my taxes, and I was like, this is a disaster. I'm totally effed.
We had this conversation recently where it's like, you don't pay taxes, they take taxes. Like, entrepreneurs pay taxes. That feels different.
Pay taxes. Yeah. I came home. I'm working on a plumbing project. I came home. My wife said, how much did it cost? And I said, this is how much it cost. And we live in Seattle. It's 10% sales tax here. So a very meaningful portion of my material cost is tax.
Yeah.
Which is I get the benefits of that too. I'm not necessarily complaining about the taxes. But that was the first time that somebody who had a strong anti-tax perspective pushed the tax burden onto me directly. It's a novel
we
trick.
are out there, us libertarians. Like, that is a thing. So, yeah. And we do tend to be entrepreneurs. I think that is because, like, it's probably more like chicken and egg, where like your propensity for wanting to not be controlled by others leads you to libertarianism as your political ideology, but also leads you to entrepreneurship as your desired tradecraft, right?
At some point, if your worldview is you can't tell me what to do,
Yeah,
eventually
100%.
you're going to have to be your own boss.
I mean, like, I've done the W-2 thing. When we were working together at Love Every, that was the longest that I've ever done a W-2, like, straight. And I did a stint at a company called CapShare, where Rory and I, it was on an earlier episode. That's where we met. But the difference at CapShare was that, there was like 10 people when I started there. I was like the 5th engineering hire, and I owned like more than 1% of the business. Like, like I had a significant stake as those things go. So I felt more like an owner and less like an employee. And at Love Every, I mean, like, I liked working for you and I liked working on my team, but I did not particularly love feeling like I was beholden to a corporate machine, which is exactly what you feel like, in any larger organization.
Yeah. We were there at a weird time in the startup life cycle because, at that point, Love Every was a mid-sized company.
Right.
They had 500 employees or whatever. That's not even a small company, much less a startup. So, but I think as leaders, it's hard to make the jump from we're a startup to we are a company when it's still the same 10 people showing up in your office.
And what's a really weird thing that I thought about since leaving Love Every and, starting Noble Squad was the OG email, right? Remember, like, some people had OG emails and other people don't, right? Like that is one of those weird kind of, like, at some point they probably should have gone and been like, you know what? Everybody that has an OG email, you also now have a big boy email, right? And you can keep your OG email, but we expect you to put your big boy email in your big boy signature, which I never had. Like, I never had a big boy signature ever. I was just like, no.
I don't think I ever set it up.
I'm just Paul. And when I would talk to people, when I would interview people, I'd be like, I'm just Paul at Love Every. Like, I'm that OG.
You're lucky that you have a 4-digit name. I've had more than one job where they're like, no, your username can't be that short.
But that's,
I'm like, dude, my name only has 3 letters. What do you want from me? Yeah, it's I want to be OG. No, when I worked at Linden Lab, all of the employees have a
wait a minute, you gotta explain that
account.
You gotta explain what Linden Lab is.
Okay, Linden Lab is the company
I knew that,
which
but there's a lot of people that are not going to know that.
And Second Life. Sure, that's fair. No, I forget. Second Life, for anybody that has ever read Snow Crash, is they wanted to make I can't remember the guy's name. The founder read that book and was like, now's the time. Let's make the metaverse. We can do this.
It's like the MySpace version of the metaverse.
Second Life
legit is. Yeah. Go ahead.
Which is why it's super anyhow, everything is derivative. I don't know what Meta calls their online world. If they call it the metaverse, I'm going to have an internal chuckle. But Second Life had 2 things that were genius. One was they didn't make any of the content. They made a water table and a day-night cycle and flat land.
They didn't even like terraform it. It was just the flat land.
The second piece of just flat land. And then they would sell it to you or lease it to you using their digital currency. So the only way to get permanent space in Second Life was to buy it from them in their virtual currency. And just like the real world, land barons bought it all up. And at the time, it was people, it was companies like IBM that they thought this was going to be like an analogous physical world. And, of course it degenerated into porn and gambling.
Pleasure Island.
And trolling noobs.
Enter Pinocchio. Yeah.
It was a great job. But they were so committed to the bit that everybody had, all of our meetings were in world. They had built a copy of their office in San Francisco in world. And so wherever you were, you could go into Second Life and put on your professional avatar and show up in the office, but the office
and would you
virtual.
Legit walk around the office it was a full 1-to-1? Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
You booked a conference room and
that
stuff.
That seems so inefficient.
Which is hilarious.
Could you warp from place to place, or how's that working?
Well, yeah, you could work from place to place, and in the physical office spaces, they had a giant TV
just the
was
mirror into the virtual space.
Wow. Yeah. So back before Zoom, that's what we were up to. And it was amazing. But so to join, to be in world, you had to have an in-world account and in-world name so that you could do your job. And everybody else came up with something cool, and I was like, no, pretty happy with my name as it is. Just going to go with this. And it was too short. So the limitations are always there.
And your ancestry. Blame the pickled fish.
I was going to say, I gotta go back 4 generations to get to the original blame.
That's pretty cool.
Because I'm named after my great-grandfather.
So you're not the 4th, though. Yeah. You're just named after him. Okay.
No.
Yeah. So
yes.
That's a cool homage. I should have done that with my kids, but I had the option when I was naming my son Timothy. My wife at the time, my ex, was like, do you want to name him Paul? And I was like, no. I've done the name collision thing. You had the problem of too short, right? You ran into validation error. I run into name collision, so I have to namespace everything.
I mean, that's the problem with all the biblical names.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, we had the name collision error in the same inheritance tree, right? So I'm the 3rd, right? So I go by Trip in my personal life, and a lot of people that will be on this podcast are going to call me Trip. I think my brother called me Trip on the.
And you didn't want.
I've thought about it.
Little Timmy to be
I
Quad?
thought about would you call him Quad or Quattro, or what would you call him? Tetra? I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, but no,
Tetra,
I just was like, no, this ends with me. We're no, I like
that's fair. That's fair.
I liked. Well,
but you still
I really like that I named him after my brother, and that he has my middle name, right? So Timothy Edward, and I loved. I never really understood it when I was a kid, but I loved the fact that my parents named my brother Timothy because Paul and Timothy in the Bible are besties, right? Which is kind of cool.
We did something similar with all of our kids are named after their great-grandparents. Cool. And for my daughter, we knew she was going to be the last one. So her name is a combination of
That's super cool.
Of her.
That's super cool.
Names are, it costs you nothing to pick a cool name or pick a name that gives homage to somebody in your family. And more than just the target person benefits from that. That my teenager's name is Erling and his namesake died while his mom was pregnant. So they were never in the same place at the same time. But there were for sure
Mm.
moments where it made my grandma feel better because people were talking about Erling. Even though it wasn't the right Erling, it was still, it kept a little bit of a connection.
Yeah.
And those connections, I think,
I think they have a lot of value. I think it's super cool. My daughter, Michaela, she's just named Michaela. Is just a female version of the name Michael, which is a cool name, right? If you're into Christian theology or, mythology or whatever, it's a cool freaking name, right? The Archangel. But her middle name is Bean, which is an homage to my sister. And we don't get to see my siblings that often. We didn't know that at the time that we were having children. Like, we didn't realize that we were going to wind up in Oregon, right? Like, there was a minute there where we were going to line up in Ohio with my siblings, and they would have seen their cousins on a regular basis and their aunt and uncle and all that good stuff. But because they don't see them on a regular basis, I love the fact that they have that connection to my side of the family, which they just don't see. Right. I'm getting a notification, Ola, your battery's at less than 20%. So you might want to plug it in.
Oh, that's pretty funny that you get the notification and not
jelly
me.
that I'm the host. Must be nice. It is nice.
Must be nice.
Heavy is the head that wears the crown. Sure.
There's naming. 2 hard things in computer science: naming things and off by 1 errors.
Cache expiration. Yeah,
I was going to be cache expiration.
It should also be
and off by 1 errors.
Like, I think the worst problem that I ever worked on in Java when I was in Java world was dealing with a time zone. Like, and I didn't know at the time. I was like a mid-level developer, and I was like, "Oh, this won't be that big a deal. Time zone, it's no big deal." And then you start getting into it, you're like, wait a minute, there are half-hour time zones in the world? And then there's places where they don't have time zones, and then they shift daylight savings. I was like, I didn't know any of this shit, right? Like, no idea.
Like, some mayor can just do it, and there's no governing body. So if, the prince of, this barren rock decides that we're not going to do daylight savings time just this year, that's forever.
Yep.
Like, forever.
And that was the moment that I recognized that libraries are a fucking just godsend, right? Like, when someone's like, I've solved this problem already. I'm a time zone nerd, and I'm like, I don't even care, dude. Just give me the library. Get it out. Sure. Absolutely. 100%. Give me the library.
Yeah, and that you learn the lesson of epoch time or UTF-0, or pick the number that you're going to do math on, and also store whatever the local time was at the time that was created.
Right.
Like, if you ever need to show it to a person, there is no magical math you can do.
Yeah, no, those are good lessons. I remember that was when I was at Domo, and that was before I was a Ruby dev. I was like doing a side hustle of Ruby, and I had trained in Ruby when I was before Domo at my master's degree. But that I remember working with a guy who would say something to the effect of like, don't ever think that you're smarter than the thousands of hours that go into whatever the open source project that you're going to leverage is. Because there were people, this was back when, like, they were like, oh, we should just roll our own authentication. It's like, why would you do that? Right? Like, I don't trust it, Yeah,
for sure there are specific domains where it's like, no, just don't ever do that. Calendar is one, cryptography is the other classic, payment processing. Like, you're never going to do a better job than Stripe.
Yeah.
You better have a really good reason that you need to be not doing the obvious thing. And when somebody says, hey, so-and-so just released the 0.1 version of this new language framework library, let's build our whole business around that, everybody needs to step back and say things like, well, how many breaking changes has their HTTP library had so far? Because the big boys didn't get it right the first 3 or 4 or 5 times. And maybe that's just picking on HTTP as a protocol, but Go, Python, Ruby all had significant breaking changes, or their like de facto industry recommendation became don't use the built-in, use whatever this other thing is. For Python, it was requests. And
I think the thing that was interesting, I remember when I was in undergrad, and I finished, so I started my undergrad at West Point at 99. I left in 2001 because of the diagnosis, and then I finished my undergrad from 2005 to 2000. While I was finishing my undergrad, I read a book called The Cathedral and the Bazaar. Have you? Yeah. And
sure.
And back then, but like back then, it was like, I read that. I read The Mythical Man Month. I read Death March, which was a really good book. But The Cathedral and the Bazaar, it wasn't like immediately apparent that open source software was going to be what it is, right? Because this is back before Android. Like, I remember when Ubuntu was like, remember when they were mailing CDs to people, right? Like,
I bought, and you're gonna laugh at me because I don't know how to say the word.
SUSE, yeah,
SUSE or
SUSE Linux,
SUSE
yeah.
Linux.
We probably got that wrong.
SUSE.
Yeah.
I bought it in a box. I got it in a box. Came with a paper manual the size of a phone book. It was still on CDs, but it came with a floppy drive, or it came with a floppy disk, so that you could boot whatever you had.
And then plug in an external and sideload.
Yeah.
And I did so much. I did so much with Ubuntu back then. I loved Ubuntu. I was just enthralled. Like, that was probably the libertarian in me. Like, the idea that like you were talking about DLLs and putting them on an ISS server or whatever, IIS server. And I was just like, oh, gross, dude. Like, ew. Like, where's your Apache? Where's your LAMP stack, bro?
And they're, keeping it PG, but like, the mess of shared dynamic libraries in every Linux distro is still.
Do you remember when?
Like,
yeah. Do you remember
has a runtime
when the Node, like a bunch of Node projects went down because was it the library? What's the library platform for them? I'm blanking on the name of it. But they had a guy that had written a bunch of libraries, and one of them was like Left Justify or something like that. And
Left Space.
They renamed his one library that had a namespace collision with whoever the frick it was, and he was just like, "Full fuck you guys," and he pulled all of his libraries and took down like a third of all Node projects. Like, I remember that happening, and I was just like, "Holy crap, dude, that's amazing." NPM, NPM. Thank you.
NPM, I think, is their package manager. They're famous for it, but I think it's a little unfair. Like, every language has this problem.
Sure, I think what was harder though is that with Node, there was so much where like it was like the inheritance tree, where if you looked, it was like everybody was related to everybody. So if you had one block in that chain, and nobody was caching, right? So like you couldn't,
nobody was caching yet. My first week at Lovevery, I watched a code review go by, and it was for we were using GUIDs or UUIDs.
I remember those conversations.
Our cross database unique blah 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 blah. Which is fine. UUIDs are a reasonable thing to do. But the argument was, should you include a gem for validating an active record field with a UUID in it so that you have a, they don't call them access, but like is valid UUID validation?
And it's specifically to make sure that it's both formatted correctly and not colliding with anything else across, right?
Right. Or should you say unique true and match the regular expression and then just have a constant regular expression for the UUID format? Because that's all the gem was doing. It was defining a regular expression constant and then kind of mixing in the uniqueness. And it was a surprising amount of robust debate on, do we want to deal with the dependency or just define that functionality ourselves? And I didn't have an opinion either way, but the, 10,000 packages for left justification is the other
exactly. That's
side
the other,
of that crazy town.
Like you said.
You don't necessarily need to copy and paste the same regular expression across 10 different projects, but if all your shared library is doing is one regular expression, is it really worth the dependency management complexity? And
that's kind of like what we do as engineering managers and leaders, right? Is that we should be having, like, to your point earlier, where it's like, hey guys, this one version 1.0, we should rebuild the entire system in whatever Batman JS or whatever the fuck it was, right? Like, I remember going to like Ruby, like Mountain West Ruby Conf, And it was like 2 days of Ruby, 1 day of DevOps, and 2 days of JavaScript. And 50% of the JavaScript talks were, hey, you should try my new framework. And the other 50% were, these frameworks are dead, right? Like, guys, can you hear it in the room, right? Like, what the hell? So I guess the point there being, like, as an engineering leader, like, it is important to take your experience and go, hey, slow down for a second, guys. There are trade-offs. There are no silver bullets. If you think there's a silver bullet, then you need to check yourself before you wreck others, right? Like, because you're 100% going to wreck other people. Like, do you remember back in the day when NoSQL was like the fad? And people were like, you don't have to worry about schemas. And I was like, 100% you do have to worry about schemas. Like, if you don't worry about them, they'll worry about you.
And this is also part of like if you're going to accept the dependency, you have to know your dependency. If you're going to deal with your DLL, you got to know what's in that DLL.
Well, I mean, like,
I worked in the video game industry, and big spikes of data was a big part of our lived experience. And we were trying Mongo, and Mongo has, I think to this day, a limitation of, to rebuild it, you have to have enough disk space available to make a 100% copy,
basically.
So if you have used more than 50%, because it's backed by memory mapped files, disk space matters. You got to have enough of it. And we had reached 65%, and we hadn't migrated to bigger disks. And so we had to take everything down, copy everything over, put everything back up on Christmas Day. Understanding your dependency is another part of that trade-off.
So, like, when you were talking about that problem, the first thing that came to my mind was like, fuck, don't do a gem, don't do like a regex or anything like that. Just do a service. Right? Do a service that checks for uniqueness. You push a GUID and it just responds good, not good. That's it. And you could do that a number of different ways, right? And people would be like, yeah, but then you have to worry about latency and you have to worry about this and that. I'm like, yeah, but like your trade-offs are your trade-offs, dude. Like, you're going to have trade-offs. And if you can't deal with an external call, like, you can't async that. Yeah. What are you doing?
What else you got going on?
Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Right.
No, I think the trade-offs, it's always about trade-offs, and but really knowing what your trade-offs are. That you got schema lists, but that really just meant you moved the responsibility for your schema someplace else. Maybe that's good.
Yeah.
Or your client, or your, somebody is
anybody paying this bill?
Got to check.
You're just going to dine and dash. Is that
Does this look the way it should?
Cool. Nice.
Okay.
I remember doing that at Domo, where they were like, oh yeah, schema list is amazing. And then they had to start querying, and they were like, yeah. I'm like, yeah, this is what the schema is for, guys. The schema is to help you query and compare things, right? They're like, I don't have to worry about anything. I can just shove it all in there. It's all there. I'm like, yeah, but you don't know what it is. And that's the problem.
And 2 years from now, your data guys are really going to love your schema list.
Well, and then it's like you have all the data in the world, but you can't answer any questions. And then the business people start getting really angry, where they're like, wait a minute, you said that we were going to be okay. Why are we not okay? Yeah.
But again, it's just a trade-off. You're deferring that engineering time that building a schema takes, and the migrations that moving from one schema change to another force. You're trading that for we got to do map reduce stuff now because our data's And sometimes that can be worth it. Like, you can answer those questions. It's just
and I think
hard.
it kind of depends. Like, it really depends on, and this is like one of those things where, the hot thing in our industry right now is AI, right? And it's like, AI is going to solve everything. And I'm like, dude, I have heard that so many fucking times. Like, in 24 years. It'll be 24 years pretty soon, right? Almost a quarter of a century. I've been doing this for money. Like, how many times have you heard, like, oh, like, this is going to solve everything. This is going to solve everything. The internet. That's how we started this conversation. Like, the internet is going to solve everything. It's like, no, like the problems are always going to be the problems. They're just going to be a little bit different, right? They're going to look a little bit different, but they're the same problems, right? Like, they're problems of scarcity, exploitation, security, right? Like those are the problems.
When you were starting with, we've heard this before, I worked with a guy whose passion was machine learning for image recognition. And the data set that they were using were, can't remember if it was lung cancer or heart deformity, but it was given this giant pile of things which radiologists have looked at and identified or not the problem. Then we're going to run it against this adjacent data set and see if we can find what's your hit rate. And he was working on that 10, 15 years ago. But radiology is like a super specialized expertise. The people that do that have to look at a grainy picture of something, and the something varies. It's hearts or kidneys or ultrasounds or whatever. And then they have to give a doctor enough information to make like a pretty important either diagnosis or treatment plan. But it's super like trainable. That the image models that look at, if we're doing hearts, this is what a heart looks like. There's a lot of variance, but if it has a black spot over here, it is 100% of the time exactly this thing. That conversation was happening for that community in the let's offshore everything time period of the 90s and 2000s, of the image recognition time period of 2010, 2015, that AI is going to eat your lunch that is not even the third time I've heard it in less than two decades. And exactly like every version before, the answer is kind of is going to make some things a lot faster, but you still definitely need a radiologist to look at every single image and confirm that it's not a defective instrument, or it's not an adjacent, very similar genetic thing instead of whatever the cancer thing you think it is. That there still is actually a trained expert spot there that if you try to price away, you will increase the percentage of your bad outcomes. And maybe that's fine.
I mean, that's kind of my experience with like driving my Tesla with full self-driving, right? Like it's really good, probably 98% of the time now. And then there's 2% where I'm like, man, I'm really glad I'm paying attention, right? Like, I'm glad it has the camera looking at my eyes to make sure I am paying attention and I can't get super lax on it. Like one of the things that it doesn't do a really good job of, which is like scary as all get out, like it does an okay job, but it doesn't do a good job. It does like a 15-year-old teenager learning to drive job, is when you go to a complete stop on the highway. Like where, not when there's a car in front of you, where there's like cars like in the distance, it doesn't pick up the horizon, and it just doesn't understand like it's not anticipating the fact that car is 100% not going to move. Like we're at a dead stop here, guys. So it's going 70 miles an hour or whatever it's going, and it's coming up on its visual acuity field, anticipating that you're going to be open, right? So it'll stop, but it is slamming on the brakes, right? Like, so, and as the expert user, I understand that. So when I see something on the horizon, I go, oh, okay. I just tap my brake and I get out of full self-driving and I let it coast. And then I pop the full self-driving back in, and it picks up, oh, that's a stopped car. I'm going to go ahead and coast up to, the line or whatever. But like with my experience with AI has been basically that exact thing, where it's like pretty good for most things, shockingly terrifying when you just let it run its course.
Yeah, you do not put a quarter cup of cayenne pepper into anything ever.
Right.
But, maybe.
The thing that I was thinking about this in the shower this morning is like, I wonder what happens when people, I forget what prompted it, specifically being in the shower. but there was something that prompted it where I was like, I wonder what happens when people figure out how to game. Oh, I was thinking about marketing metrics and like Amazon and stuff like that. And I was like, I wonder what happens when people figure out how to game large language models, right? Where there's just this cat and mouse of like,
because that's
every single time we've done
right?
this,
Like
every single
100%
time we've
that's
done
going to
this
happen.
rodeo, everyone's like, this is the time. It's going to be utopia. And it's like, nope, not this time.
Guys, let me tell you about this new search engine I found. It's so much better than Yahoo. We're all going to use Alta Vista forever.
Remember when Google was like considered the good guys and like they were going to be the best, and now you're like corporate shills, roast. Yeah.
Though there is just like a type of shark that chases money around, and if you do anything that makes enough billions, they're gonna show up, and it doesn't matter what your doesn't matter who you are or what
your
you
values,
think your capabilities are. If you get enough dollars under your dragon, somebody is gonna show up and figure out how to kill that dragon.
It's always finance guy, right? That's our joke.
You know,
like it always comes back to finance guy. It's always
finance guy. It's finance guy. But when you look at, the it doesn't matter what the industry is. If you're BP, finance guy is going to turn your oil company into a bank. If you are Boeing, McDonnell Douglas is going to turn your company into a bank and a subcontractor funnel. Like, finance guy is just going to figure out how to take Toys R Us and turn it into a real estate company. Like, it doesn't matter what it is. So it's not a surprise that Google eventually became exactly what it is, where the first 10 search results are, I don't even understand how I would pay for this, but I know I don't want to. And it's coming for AI. We're in the honeymoon period, but it's going to be faster because AI already soaked up the billions. Well, like, those companies already have tens of billions of dollars.
I think what's going to be really interesting is to see how things kind of shake out. You remember, like, our industry has gone through so many iterations of like boom and bust, right? You had like the dot-coms. You had before the dot-coms, you had like the whole where like my dad worked as a programmer at Chemical Corporation. It was like they got bought by Dow Chemical eventually, right? And he was a programmer doing their own internal software. Like, that was a weird fucking time, right? Like, my dad's a wonderful human being. I love my father. He is not a programmer. Like, I remember being like 4th grade or something like that, doing a report, and he's explaining to me like COBOL, and I knew he wasn't a programmer, right? Like, it's like, bro, what are you doing here?
But I am not at all surprised to hear that. Like, that was COBOL's promise, was that you didn't have to be a programmer. This is like people that build their entire business around an Excel spreadsheet.
That's a move.
You're like, you can do that. That's a thing. It gets you really
into
far.
A scary box canyon.
Because you don't.
Yeah.
Sure. But, hey, I sold my business for $25 million, and all it was this spreadsheet is a thing. And it's a common thing.
Yeah. And then that person that bought it hires someone like us and says, hey, can you just make it look like the spreadsheet? And like, that's like 50% of my career is just make it look like the spreadsheet. Right. And then
I was just going to say, my first like full-time programming job out of college was at an insurance company where they had built everything on Access databases. And their plan was hire programmers, stop doing stuff in Access databases. And that's like, wow, you guys really are like hundreds of millions of dollars a year in $2003 on Access databases. Like, that was their plan. And it was working fantastic. Like, they weren't hiring us because what they had didn't work. They were hiring us so that 15 years later, it would keep working as well as it was.
Because like, you can definitely build a $25 million company or $2 million company or whatever it is, however many millions of dollars, that doesn't have the margin to pay for. And I've seen that happen where it's like, okay, cool. You've got this Access database, you've got this Excel spreadsheet or whatever it is. and you want to make it a real boy software, that's going to cost $3 million. And they go, what? $30,000. What can I do with $30,000? And I'm like, basically pay for this meeting. You want to, what? So if you don't have the margin, you don't have the margin, you don't have the margin. It doesn't matter. And that's the box canyon, right? And you need to get out of the box canyon before that canyon gets too deep.
Yeah, I go either way on this. It's like you either like know that and know that you're going to be doing spreadsheets the whole time and bring whatever sort of best practice you can to that and make it work, or cut bait early, get the money, make it right, do the thing. I worked at Zulily before Love Every, and they're a flash sale company. So they do, here's 10,000 size 9 Nike shoes, go sell them for 12% of their retail value, but get rid of all of them right now. So they have a really complicated merchandise intake process. And for the entire lifetime of that company, that intake process was through a spreadsheet. And the first step was go clone the spreadsheet, go put in all your stuff, and then press the upload button. And when it gets to wherever it's supposed to be after that, go make sure everything works. And they went public, and then they went private equity, and now I think they're private. But for sure, that spreadsheet is still
wild to me. I worked for a brief period in telecom. That's how. Do you know how 800 numbers are transferred around the country? Like, it's CSV files, text files, and FTP.
I was going to say I don't, but I'm sure that is an AS400 CSV.
It's just
IBM
text files
nonsense.
In FTP sites. That's all it is. And like the processing of the text file means the FTP site gets the file gets deleted off your FTP, right? That's how you know it left. Like it just it went out the door. You're like, where did it go? Presumably somewhere.
I feel like this is secretly how DNS and whatever the router language is for who should get this packet next.
I guarantee you it's just some bubblegum bullshit underneath the covers. Like if you look real hard, you're gonna find some duct tape and baling wire, right? Like, I mean that's the XKCD comic, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, the one guy in Nebraska.
Yeah, the one guy in Nebraska.
Yeah.
It's Michelle's neighbor.
It's all trade-offs, man. It's all trade-offs, and I think the big thing is like, can you create enough value in the time period that you're given to justify the trade-off? Like, I think that's the question. That's the question that we don't really think about or ask, right? Is like, am what I doing in the decisions that I'm making, am I going to create enough forward momentum that whatever headwind I'm also creating with my trade-off is going to be worth the trade, right?
Yeah. And I think understanding the real costs, those are the two pieces that I know I've struggled with, or looking back, it's been like, that was way more expensive.
I think the only way that you're able to do that effectively is to actually have experience. Because like otherwise what you are relying upon is marketing BS, hype, the hype curve, right? Like, oh, it's going to be different this time. Like, no, it's probably not, right? Like,
Well, and this ties you back to the AI piece. Like, we don't yet understand that trade-off, and it looks a lot like you don't need expertise to understand that trade-off, and that can't be true.
I think the thing that like really scares me about this one, and this goes back to the point that I didn't close, like the loop that I didn't close, is, we've gone through these boom and bust cycles, but this particular cycle feels a little scarier to me than the other ones in the past, because what I don't think we're doing in the industry is I don't think we're creating the future. Like, I don't think we're creating future seniors and future leaders, right? I think we are short-circuiting the new crop of, junior developers that are going to become our mids and our seniors. And there's going to be this like age explosion or age collapse problem in like 10 years where you're just not going to have experienced developers that know what the hell they're doing.
So that definitely happened in the right after the .com bust, that computer science departments closed because either people thought oh, this is bust and nobody's gonna, it's never gonna come back. Or there was a real, like, passionate, business-driven appetite for, you can be a programmer anywhere. Why wouldn't we hire people that are in cheaper locations to do the same? And I think that exact same conversation is happening now. That we have AI, we have COVID, which showed you can remote from anywhere. Why wouldn't we just hire in cheaper places? And the answer is going to be the same, that you can. And some of those folks are fantastic.
Yeah.
They're
we worked with a couple of them out of Mexico and Brazil that were
all
awesome.
Of the places.
It's fantastic.
Mexico, all of South America, I've worked with engineers from almost everywhere down there. And it doesn't, where you are isn't what makes you a great engineer. But you're never going to be able to get out from under time zones. And it actually is really expensive to try and coordinate with somebody that's 13 and a half hours off of where you are. And there are like cultural differences, which are hard.
I think the cultural difference of like if you're in a big corporate environment and the people that you're hiring are okay with kind of like being told what to do and how to do it and things of that nature, I think, like that can work. I think it's a lot harder for early stage startups where it's kind of like, I don't have a map. You have to create your own map, do it fast and be right? Like that's a much different world.
Yeah. And both of those come with, again, it's the same trade-offs. If you are only going to do exactly what I tell you to do, then it's on me to be 100% right. And that's a hard plan to make. If I expect you to operate independently and be right 100% of the time, that's you could be right a lot, but 100%
it depends on,
is hard to hit.
Like that's to talk a little bit about startup land, right? That's the argument for making sure that you have done a really appropriate raise and that you're not bootstrapping. Because when you are bootstrapping, like every cycle you missed is just another step towards death. Right. Like, and I've done that, right? Like I've been part of those bootstrap kind of initiatives where you're like, hey, we're not going to make payroll. And it looks like we're never going to make payroll ever. So I guess we don't do this anymore, guys. And it's just like, shit, I was having fun, right? Like, I thought this was awesome.
Yeah, I thought this was great.
Right.
Why didn't you raise twice as much?
Yeah.
This was going to work.
But again, trade-offs, right? Because then you do the other thing where you take a ton of money and then finance guy owns you, and you don't want that. You don't like when finance guy owns you, right? It's okay to work with finance guy. It's not okay to work for finance guy.
Finance guy has his own stakeholders, and they are
and I think, like, again, there's an argument to be made, and I've seen it work where you take big money and you have those stakeholders and they're not patient, but you have the resources and you make good moves and then you can get to the exit, right? And everybody's happy. I've seen that work. I've also seen where you don't take the right money, you don't make the right moves. And it's almost kind of like that some of these trade-offs, it's the levering effect, right? Where if you're not right, you're going to be wrong in a big, 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 big way. So like take schemaless, like going schemaless on data, right? If all you're doing is grabbing log data and you're schemaless, that probably makes sense because like if you have to do a hard query, you probably are doing like forensic type stuff. So like whatever. But if you go schemaless on transactional data and you have to create dashboards on a regular basis, now you're really screwed. Like hard screwed because that's an exponential curve on difficulty that you're having to scale every fucking time. And again, this is part of that whole discussion of like, I think this episode is called the one where we talk about trade-offs. Understanding what you're going to be doing, you don't necessarily know the problem you're going to solve, but you probably know the domain that you're going to be in.
When you talk about trade-offs, like any decision, you need to understand your inputs to make a good one. this is kind of an obvious thing, but the recent application here is that people are making trade-off decisions as it pertains to AI and how AI is changing our industry without that expertise or without that understanding. We don't really right now understand how AI is going to look 5 years from now, but we know from things like Google's search results that as soon as those sharks that chase money start getting after it, it's going to get weird. And when it gets weird, it's not going to be as straightforward that the answer it gave you is for your benefit. That if you're not paying for it, and if you're not paying a lot for it, you're not the customer, is kind of a guideline that's going to be really important to remember when we're 5 years into the AI party, because you're going to start getting results that are going to be difficult to trust, and you're not going to know how to trust them if you don't already know everything there is to know in that domain. So I think we're really, like, from my perspective, we're in a really risky place where people don't understand how they can be a junior engineer in this environment, because right now AI can cover a lot of the stuff that junior engineers were doing. But if you don't make more, you're not going to have any seniors. And if you don't have a way for seniors to grow, you're going to find yourself in a place where you are dependent on a tool where you can't understand the trade-offs you're making. And it's not necessarily going to be operating in your best interest. Just like marketing and search engines, it's real hard to tell whose best interest is served by that right now. We know that if you put money into the Google box, referrals and conversions come out, but we don't understand why or how much or what the optimal amount is. And I think that AI is going to be
there's so many things here that I would want to talk about in a future episode where did you ever read Larry Riven's Ringworld?
That sounds familiar.
It's an old school sci-fi book, and it is, ostensibly the inspiration or partial inspiration for Halo. So, but one of the things in that book is that it's an advanced society that creates this ring, this Halo ring, but apparently lost their connection to their engineering abilities. And the people that are left are basically, Neolithic humans, right, that are surrounded by this amazing technology that they don't understand and can't control. But every once in a while I think about that. It's like, how do you get to that point? And do you realize that you're at that point where you go, the wheels keep moving, but I have no idea how the wheels move. And if they stop moving, I'll never start them again. Right? That's a scary proposition.
I don't know about you, but for sure I've worked at least one company where nobody really understands. They didn't understand it when they wrote it, and they left. So the people that understand it now have a best guess. And I think that's the good news, is a best guess is pretty good, and you can do a lot with that, and over time you can recover it. But yeah, for sure, stuff gets lost.
When your entire industry does that, right? Where it's like, we don't know how any of this works. Hey guys, is that scary to anybody else? That's scary to me. What are we doing here?
That was the Y2K lesson that I don't know if anybody learned. Maybe you should have kept paying those COBOL guys a little longer.
Well, and I think part of the reason that nobody learned the Y2K lesson is because Y2K was a no-op, right? It's like a non-event, right? That maybe it should have been an event, or at least there should have been a couple of flare-ups somewhere where everyone goes like, oh shit, maybe we should have done that different in the future, right? And I'm not calling for regulation, because again, we've covered, I'm a libertarian, but there are cases where you're just like,
no one proposed that.
We probably need someone to hold our hand on this one, because I don't think everyone's making good decisions, right? And again, I'm a big fan of just let it fail. Just let it fail. Let the industry correct itself. The problem is that we wind up building on top of things.
It's going to be a rough couple years, but because the lesson they're going to have to learn is, no, your finance guy really did have to pay those people.
Yeah.
There were some that you didn't have to pay forever, or you didn't have to pay the whole time, but you got to pay some of them, and you got to actually pay them.
Right.
And because
invest in them. You can't. It's not just pay them, but like grow them, invest in them. Like, because that's the other. Like, even before AI started eating the industry, like, there are definitely places that you and I have both been at where they're like, yeah, we're not hiring juniors. No one's hiring juniors. You can't hire juniors because they're not worth it. Okay. How does
that
this
going to
work,
work out? Yeah, I think about that a lot. That I worked at Amazon for 4 years, and I think the entire time we never hired a single entry-level engineer. The only way you could go from college to Amazon was through the internship process. There was never a direct hire from college.
What's wild for me is that some of the best people that I've ever worked with, some of the best hires I've ever made have been entry level. Right? Like,
yeah.
And they're absolute total fucking just crazy awesome developers so fast, because like it doesn't take a lot. And this is the thing that I think is really tragic in our industry that people don't understand. And I think they don't understand it within the programming world, like, the engineering world. And I think business guy and finance guy 100% don't understand this, where they're like, you guys are all basically wizards, right? Like, you're all basically the same kind of thing. Y'all have wands or some shit like that. Whatever, bro. Just get a bunch of your nerd friends and go make some shit. And it's like, no. We're more like, right? Like, we're more like people that write prose. And some people can write novels, and some people can write really good novels, like J.K. Rowling style, like huge worlds and, multiple episodes of things that make a whole shit ton of sense over 7 books or whatever can be turned into a movie. Some people can do that. And then there's a lot of people that all they do is they write fucking Pulp Fiction, and it's just garbage, right? And business guy and finance guy, they don't understand the difference, because they're like, yeah, it's all words, right? It's all basically the same thing. It's like, no, it's not. It's not even close to the same thing. One has continuity and structure and obeys certain laws. Good planning, right? Exactly. And I think that part, like, that you don't understand that if you can't understand that aspect, you can't hire an entry level developer, because you can't screen for who can learn that, right? Like, you don't need to be the most badass. You need to be the Karate Kid. You need to have the aptitude and the attitude to be able to pick it up. And then you need someone like you or I, who's a Mr. Miyagi, that can be like, okay, this is how you do it. This is wax on, wax off. These are the rules, right? But like, that's
for
hard.
Sure, I think we should talk about that hiring aspect soon, or next, or in the near future. When you're hiring software engineers, you're not even looking for, can you push the bits around as your first selection criteria. Like, it's interesting. It's important. Obviously, you need to be able to do the activity, but
I think that's such a baseline. Like, you might as well say, like, hey, do you breathe? Are you breathing here, dude? Or like it's so baseline.
All of the other characteristics are almost more important.
Easily.
You can tell from a resume if somebody can do the activity. You don't need to cover that in the interview.
And if they're snowing you, you're gonna figure it out. Like, if you do any kind of activity, you should be able to figure it out pretty fast.
Minutes.
Right?
Minutes.
Like, have them write code, have them pair with you, have them do I don't care what your code screen is. If you have them do any kind of code screen, you're going to figure it out if they can do the bits. Right? But well, anyway, let's wrap this up. We'll talk about these topics in the next one and the next one after that. Ola, it's always cool hanging out with you. I love doing this, and we've been talking about doing this for a long time, because we have these fun, long, bullshitty conversations.
I was going to say, this is a one-on-one where we just didn't respect the end time.
Yep, exactly. but I don't know. I love talking to you, because you and I have similar but different, but both long careers in this industry, and we have these cool intersections where we're like, oh yeah, I remember doing stupid shit like that, and you're like, yeah, I remember doing stupid shit like that too. So it's just fun to to just talk about code, and it'll be interesting to talk in future episodes and see how different we are when it comes to like our leadership approaches and whatnot. I'm so much more aggressive and you're so much more cautious than I am. But I think it's a good balance. So yeah.
No, I mean, and you need both. I look forward to it.
You do need both. You do need both. So, all right, Ola, really appreciate you. Looking forward to talking to you again soon. And I will see you on the next one.
Sounds good. See you, Paul. Thank you.